being valued as an employee. I think sometimes to have an open conversation like that with people is important, but a lot of people, that's uncomfortable as well, right? So they don't want to. But if she's got this, you know, he's given her free reign to do her department, but then yet he's frustrated. There's got to be a happy joining place where he can go to her and say, hey, I value you. You're doing a lot of hard work. You know, she's got all these other things coming into her life and she's trying to balance them. Does she have the support she needs internally? And then is he being a good leader, not just not just the boss, but is he actually, you know, helping her? Is he showing compassion?
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. What's your name, by the way? We see that it says G7.
Maria Elena. Great White Smile.
Great. So Maria Elena.
Can't the boss submit a letter or a conversation giving her knowledge that maybe there's been an availability of funds for her to hire somebody? Wouldn't that be a non-aggressive way to instruct her to hire somebody?
Great. Good suggestion. So that actually opens me up beautifully to the next question that I have, which is, in his situation, what would you do? And so there's one suggestion, is to let her know there are funds to hire another person. Now, I would even go so far as to say, and you have no way of knowing this, one more person isn't going to do it, right? Because there's going to be a number of, you know, there's going to be a ramp up period and all that kind of stuff. And what else can you do to address this conflict, or at least the appearance of the conflict between values, you know, the values of compassion and loyalty on the one hand, and the value of needing performance on the other hand? Any other thoughts about what you might do in his situation? Yeah.
Maybe he could actually attempt to give her an additional responsibility, which would then require more people and an instruction of a team to be hired, and her to delegate more if she could, because he would like to be able to conversate with her more and maybe have a day of communication that's dedicated for needs, goals, achievements.
So if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting add more to her plate so that it becomes abundantly clear to her that this is more than she can handle. Is that,
Yeah, or an event, like incorporate a health awareness day, or, you know, something that would require more help.
Got it. I love it.
That way, everybody that is hired on for this new task can then be suggested to stay on staff.
My favorite thing about that is that, knowing the situation as I do, I also know that there have been certain projects that the organization needs to have completed for HR that have been postponed, that nobody's told her about, because they know that she's already under the gun. She's already got too much on her plate to handle. So what I really like about what you're saying is that that perhaps by really being transparent about what the organization needs, really completely, that the scope of it might reach the point where she would say, okay, I really do need to hire more people. I do need to somehow expand the capacity of my part of the organization. Great. So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, just a tiny bit, by offering a perspective, right? Which I think is the most powerful shift that this CEO is making, which is that he, like so many leaders that I talk to, he is trying to balance compassion and the value of autonomy against the value of accountability. Right? And he's kind of putting them on a scale and trying to see how heavy does the problem of accountability need to get before it outweighs the problem of compassion, the problem of the value of autonomy. And what I'm going to suggest is that they all are really married. That that instead of saying, I want the performance, but I also value compassion, and I have a lot of compassion for her. I want the performance, but I need to give her autonomy. Is the word "and" marries them incredibly powerfully. We have this need for performance, and we have the value of compassion. We have this need for performance, and I really value autonomy. And for the sake of the company, performance is a requirement, and so is compassion, and autonomy is a value that takes takes a second level to both of those. That it's possible to say, let's call her Geraldine, right? It's possible to say, Geraldine, I really feel for the position you're in. The amount of stuff that you have to do for us with 100 heads, and all of the chaos that's happening in your personal life, I really feel for you. And the organization needs this performance. It doesn't necessarily need it from you. We need the results. We need people to get their benefits handled on time. If there's a problem with payroll, we need to be able to address those problems immediately so that people aren't wondering about where their money is. So that's the result that needs to happen. At the same time as I have a tremendous amount of compassion for you, let's figure out how to get there. And by the way, your deadline for solving this problem is X and such a date, right? And that is where the autonomy comes in. Is you have all of the time until the deadline to figure out how to make this happen. By the way, if it isn't solved by the deadline, you lose the autonomy. Because I'm going to keep the compassion even while I require the performance. And it is possible to take away autonomy while keeping compassion. It is possible to take away somebody's job even while keeping compassion. Eventually, we need people to perform no matter how much compassion we have for them. And we can let them go with compassion, with generosity. I know people who have said, all right, I'm gonna pay you for the next 30 days. Your job is to go find a new job, right? That's a compassionate way to lay somebody off. Because you're requiring the performance, you're requiring the accountability at the same time as you're holding the compassion. And autonomy is something that sometimes has to give, right? The autonomy to keep your job or the autonomy to make the decisions. So one of the things that this CEO, for example, is considering is outsourcing some of that HR, the day-to-day HR headaches, because she's been reluctant to do that because she feels like she should be able to handle it. She's got a certain, there's a certain pride on the line of doing her job and doing her job well. That's meant that she can't look at the possibility of outsourcing these HR needs. And it's coming down to the point where he is going to put his foot down and say, I want you to be able to focus on the things that really reward you, that you're not having the time to get to. I've given you X number of months to bring the performance of your department up to snuff. And through no fault of your own, you're not able to handle it on your own. And for whatever reason, you're not able to make the decisions that would mean that it's gonna happen. So I'm gonna take away a certain degree of autonomy and change your job. Your job is no longer to handle the ins and outs of the day-to-day HR stuff. Your job is now gonna be to handle coordinating this outsourced day-to-day and making sure that talent development and the things that you really are passionate about anyway, that's going to be your daily bread and butter, is doing that stuff. So I hope that you can see how that strategy both embraces both the compassion and the accountability, rather than balancing them one against the other. I'll take a moment to ask you, am I making sense of this for you?
Yes.
Most definitely.
Sure. So my next question is, are there places in your professional life, or heck, in your personal life, where you are stuck trying to balance them, or where you're falling all the way onto compassion or falling all the way onto accountability and not marrying the two? So I'll give you a moment to just kind of take an inventory. Are there places in your professional or even in your personal life where you are trying to balance the two instead of marrying the two?
I don't think so.
You don't think so, and that's fantastic. If you're right, that's fantastic. I would say there are not, like in my own personal life and in my professional life, there are not places where I do it consistent, where I am way out of balance. And there are times that I often need to remind myself, okay, I've forgotten the compassion part of this, right? It's all well and good to demand accountability, and I need to bring compassion into this. And then there are a few places where I have to go, okay, I'm going all in on compassion, and I need to bring in some accountability, both in my professional life, right, and also in my home life. There are places where I get out of balance and then have to bring the balance back.
I feel like I'm constantly balancing. At some point, I'm very, sometimes, especially when you're in our profession, we're dealing with so many different types of personalities and deals, that, I know sometimes I can be demanding, where it's, I have compassion to a point where it becomes almost I'm being taken advantage of. Mm-hmm. Or maybe other people are taking advantage of the situation, and then the foot needs to come down to say, hey, I love you, but these are the rules, you're going to get spanked, kind of a deal. So, but that happens even now in my personal life too, where, it's a constant balance to know where you need to pump the gas and when you need to pump the brakes a little bit on where that line is. And I think for like what Catherine was saying, I think having those bumpers in a lane where you've mentioned it too, Aaron, where you kind of already have the structure in place to know, these are where our performance needs to be in order to reach X goal. And, we're fine moving in that world of autonomy as long as we stay within the bumpers of where we need to go to get where we need to go. But as soon as those lines are crossed, then, compassion has a limit, I think.
So what if compassion doesn't have a limit? What if compassion is unlimited and your decisions, right, have a limit? Your areas of accountability have a limit. And that's the shift. That's one of the shifts that I'm recommending.
That's a tough one.
What if it's not, I have compassion, and I think I'm quoting you pretty directly. What if it's not, I have compassion for you up to a point, but there are places where the bumpers have to come in. What if it's, I have infinite compassion for you. I would love to give my services away to every single person out there who could use them. And if I do that, I won't be able to pay my mortgage, and I won't be able to feed my kid, and all sorts of other things are going to, like, I'll only be able to do that at all for a month, and then I'll stop having to offer the value that I have to the marketplace, And that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That this is the power of the word and. There's a great book on negotiation by a guy named Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference. And Chris Voss used to be a hostage negotiator, right? So you can imagine how Never Split the Difference is a great title, because if you've got 10 hostages and you're saying I'm going to kill them all, and I say, well, send me 5, right? Go ahead and kill the other 5. That's not a workable negotiation.
True.
Right. He suggests a fantastic question called, how am I supposed to do that? Right. So if we bring that back to the CEO that I was talking about, one of the breakthroughs that happened for him in kind of negotiating with himself and with his director of HR was saying, I would like nothing better than to just let you come in when you can and let you not come in when you can't. I would like nothing better than to let you run this department however you want to, delegate nothing. I would love to be able to give you complete autonomy. And when that means that some of the most basic needs of our employees aren't being met, how am I supposed to do that? And what that does is it shifts both people onto the same side of the table. And instead of being at loggerheads, now we're looking at a puzzle together. That question all by itself shifts the mind of the person that you're speaking to into your perspective, whether they want to go to your perspective or not. So it's an incredibly powerful negotiation tool, and it's also an incredibly powerful, compassionate leadership and management tool. How am I supposed to do that?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, you're sitting on the same side of the table as them, as opposed to being on different sides. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions about this topic of marrying compassion with accountability before I move on to the second of 3 things that I want to talk about with you today?
I'm good.
Great. So what's that, Josh?
I said I'm good.
Okay, cool. So the second thing that I want to talk about, I think, is really comes out of this idea, right? Because with the desire to, the commitment to marrying compassion with accountability, accountability is a dynamic thing, and if COVID has taught us anything, it's that our sense of predictability, our sense of control, our sense of stability was all an illusion, right? It's not that now we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. It's just that now we know that we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We didn't know anything about what tomorrow is going to bring before. It's just that more often than not, tomorrow brought what we thought it was going to bring, more or less. Then we got hit by a tidal wave, and that illusion was shattered. So there's a very important concept that people talk about, contracts, right? And we've got written contracts with our clients. We've got written contracts with our vendors. I'm talking about a different kind of contract, the contract that happens when we say, for example, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow on Zoom at 3:30. Right, that's a contract. Basically, I'm substituting the word contract for agreement because for whatever reason, we hold agreements with a lighter grip than we hold contracts. So I'm part of using the word contract is intended to give us a tighter hold on the agreements that we make and make them less mushy, less something that we feel like we can just let go of, and more something that we feel like we really need to hang on to. So contracts, I'm going to say, like all these agreements, the agreements that we make, not honoring those agreements challenges our integrity. I think all of us would say, yeah, we value integrity highly. That doesn't necessarily mean that we therefore go and honor our commitments, honor our agreements. So I find it useful myself to think of all my agreements as contracts. So that's just to set the context for, because life is unpredictable, honoring a contract is not necessarily the same thing as meeting that obligation, doing what it is that we said we were going to do. It's not always possible to do what it is that we said we were going to do, right? I told my client 4 months ago, come April 20th, we are going to be in Portland in a hotel conference room together, right? That is not a possible agreement for me to make, or rather not a possible agreement for me to meet. I can't do it. I can't do it morally. I can't do it in terms of safety. I can't even anymore do it legally. So that is a literal written contract that we've had to renegotiate, right? You've given us money. You've expected these services. We can no longer deliver these services. How are we going to meet the spirit of this obligation without meeting the letter of the contract? I will meet you on Zoom tomorrow at 3:30 is essentially the same. I will have this deliverable for you by Friday at noon is essentially the same thing. And all sorts of unpredictable things, maybe even some predictable things, are going to come up between now and then that may challenge my ability to deliver, to meet you at 3:30 on Zoom, or to hand over that deliverable. What happens far too often, and lots of leaders complain to me about this, is that the deadline comes up and the deliverable isn't there. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Right? That's unacceptable. Being vulnerable to the unpredictable cannot be unacceptable, right? If I get hit by a bus, guess what? I'm not going to be at our Zoom meeting at 3:30. If my daughter breaks a tooth and we have to go to the emergency room, I am not going to have that deliverable for you on Friday at noon. What's not acceptable is simply not showing up. So all of these are moments when the contract has to be renegotiated. So if we think about it as a contract, and now I know I'm repeating myself because I really would like this to stick, then we're much more likely to reach out and say, hey, I need to change the terms of this agreement. Now that's something that we can do as leaders. We can say, I know I told you that you had a job here for as long as you needed it. I did not anticipate the intense reduction in revenue that we've experienced. I'm going to have to lay you off. I'm renegotiating the terms of the agreement, right? There are far too many people who are being laid off right now. Just a moment, Sharon. Love that you're having fun, and I'm going to mute you. So there are far too many people laying people off right now, simply saying, I need to. They're not saying, I know that I know that the agreement was that we're going to keep doing this as long as you're doing a good job. The acknowledgement of that commitment is critical. The flip side of this is to let your people know, look, I know the inevitable is going to come up. The only thing that's real, the furthest unacceptable thing is to have the deadline arrive without any notice that you're not going to meet it. And that balances, again, it marries rather than balances the compassion and the accountability. Any questions, any thoughts about what I'm sharing with you? And I know that it doesn't seem profound, right? Maybe the marrying compassion and accountability, the first thing we did, maybe seems profound. I'm gonna suggest that the idea that these agreements are renegotiable, and that renegotiating them is possible, is profound, and you, I'm sure, have tons of experience that it is not often practiced. right? 5 minutes late to a meeting is an opportunity to renegotiate a contract, rather than put somebody through 5 minutes of wondering when and if you're going to show up, wondering when and if they should reach out and say, hey, are you remembering our meeting, right? That 5 minutes is 5 minutes that matters because it puts somebody else through an experience. 5 minutes, even on a deadline, right? Friday at noon, 5 minutes is a meaningful period of time. I remember in college, well, in high school, I was not permitted to get extensions. They said, we're not going to give you extensions because when you get to college, nobody's going to give you extensions. And then I remember going to a professor and saying, I need 2 more hours to get this turned in. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads, right? Because he was like as if I'm even going to notice. I was proud that I did that. I did that my freshman year. I said I need a 2-hour extension, and he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I went, even though he looked at me like I had 3 heads, I went through all 4 years. If I ever needed an hour's extension, I asked for it. And I got letters of recommendation from professors who actually said, I remember you came and asked me for a 2-hour extension. I will recommend you with the highest recommendation that I can because of that level of integrity. It wasn't anything else but my integrity that they spoke to in that letter of recommendation. So I'm taking a lot of time and repetition on this concept because it's more profound than we give it credit for. Last chance for thoughts or questions about this before I move on to the third and final thing that I wanted to cover with you today.
I'm good. I'm excited for the next topic.
What's
What was
that?
the name of the second? What would you call your second point, Aaron?
Agreements or contracts. They can and should be renegotiated if you're not going to meet the letter of the agreement. Thank you for that question. That helps me to make sure that I'm stating things simply as I'm also telling stories.
What you mentioned, I should raise my hand. I like that about, the accountability and integrity. I mean, something as simple as like right before we were talking earlier about my daughter falling down. I mean, she had a Zoom class call with her teacher and a small group of kids to do some practice words and things like that. And I emailed her really quick. I said, hey, we had quite a bit of a fall. We're not going to make it. It's in 5 minutes. And she said, hey, no problem. You could do it for Thursday. I'm really big on if I can't make something, if I'm going to be delayed or whatnot, no matter if it's my kids thing or, meeting a friend, I'm going to let them know, hey, I'll be right there. Or, hey, that was something really important when I was growing up with my family that, that integrity is really important.
Yeah. People notice that. And it affects your whole relationship. And that affects your ability to negotiate with them. It affects your ability to, if you're talking about somebody whom you supervise, it affects your ability to lead them. If you're talking about somebody who supervises you, it affects your ability to earn their respect and all the things that come along with that respect.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I can see that with when I first started. Catherine was the old broker on the block, and I remember I kept having issues with people not showing up to the appointments I set, and she was very big on getting verbal contract from people about, I'm going to be there at 9. Are you going to be there at 9? Is everyone that needs to be there going to be there at 9? And so that way, if you showed up, if they weren't there, there was a contract that was not being met, and that is a negotiating point, for good or bad. So
100%.
Yeah, that upfront contract, making sure they're going to be there, they're the right decision maker, and that you've got so much time. So if you say, hey, I have a meeting to present something to you for 45 minutes, and they say, oh, you got 10 minutes, go. You can call out and say, no, Mr. Business Owner, that's not the agreement. And they're going to see, holy moly, this person is going to stick to their ground and make me go through with their 30-minute presentation.
That's right. Raina.
So I took a course a couple of years ago on cultural bias and in communication specifically, but part of it was about, team building and being on a team who is diverse. And a lot of people don't view being on time the same way our culture does. So
Yes.
How do you work with teams like that where when they come from a culture where being 5 minutes late is perfectly acceptable and they've done that up until they're an old person and now they're in some new environment?
Fantastic. That's a great question. And I'll even expand that to different families view it differently, right? Even within the same seeming culture. Culture is, there's climate, right? And then like if you go to San Francisco, you really learn that there's such a thing as microclimate, right? You go from one block to the next and you might encounter completely different weather. So the same thing is true here. It doesn't have to be that one person is from the US and another person is from Kenya and another person is from El Salvador and another person is from Britain. There are microclimates within our own companies, which is why, one of the concepts that we teach our clients at the Yes Works is be obvious. What's obvious to me is not necessarily what's obvious to you. We didn't grow up in the same place. There's no such thing as common sense. Common sense only comes with common experience, and no two of us have truly common experience. So it is imperative to set the expectations, right? You can, just like we're marrying, I love that we can come back again to marrying compassion with accountability. Your culture may view being on time in a different way from our culture. In our company, the culture is you're on time. And on time means at the stroke of go, you're in your seat with attention, right? So that's what I'm expecting from you. It's got no judgment on where you come from or what your culture's thoughts about being on time may be. That simply is the culture here. Right? So you can have compassion for and respect for another culture, and at the same time expect a certain kind of performance, right? Because being on time is a kind of performance. You can expect any legal and the word I'm looking for is ethical behavior from somebody in your employ.
So how would you recommend for, like, our brokers, they're visiting all different kinds of businesses where their culture may win out in the situation. So how would you recommend they go about setting that expectation and being transparent? How do you navigate that?
That's a great question. And again, it comes down to me setting expectations. They might say, I'm going to be there as I did with you, right? Right before this, earlier today, I said, I'm going to be on the call at least 5 minutes ahead of time. If I'm not there, you'll know there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. So to say, I'm going to be there precisely at 5 minutes to 9, I'm not going to expect you to be there until 9, and I've got a limited amount of time. So I'd love to be able to start right at 9. Is that going to be a problem?
That's
and
great.
If they say yes, then I say, great. What is a better time for you?
I like that.
All right. So with the 12 minutes that we've got remaining, I want to move on to my the third and final thing that I wanted to cover, which is that there is, yes.
I just have one question.
Please.
Of course, my version of compassion might be different than your version of compassion. I imagine I probably I seem to have an excessive amount of compassion. Let's say they don't show up on time. They don't follow through with their responsibility. Let's say they're 10 minutes late and they don't bother to call or don't show. what would your follow-up be that would be a good marrying for the accountability to the compassion that you're talking about? What would be the steps in like the first situation, the second situation, the third situation? And at what point would you consider that process becoming more serious?
Are we talking about somebody who works for us?
Like, let's say I'm trying to create an outline that, because when we talk about this, everybody's version of compassion is going to be different.
Yeah.
And everybody's version of accountability is going to be their own perspective. So from your standpoint, what would be, so I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. Let's say you have a Zoom call set up and 5 out of the 10 people are 6 minutes late. One of them is 10 minutes late.
Yep.
What would be your reaction and your follow-up to conversation for those individual people, and just one, of course, perspective for one version and one percent?
So I would probably globally share, hey folks, when we're on time, everybody's time is used well. When we're not on time, nobody's time is used well. I'd really love everybody to be on time, right? So that we can accomplish what we've set out to accomplish with the greatest effectiveness and efficiency, right? That's kind of a global thing, not calling anybody out. Individually, and this is whether people work for me or whether they're clients, I might say, hey, when the meeting time arrives and you're not there, I start to wonder whether I've got the wrong time, and this is just a factual observation, right? I start to wonder whether I've got the right time, whether you're coming. I start to become impatient, wondering whether we're going to have time to accomplish what we're coming together to accomplish. Can I get your agreement to be on time in the future? Right? If they say no, then I've got decisions to make. Do I want to keep working with this person, for example? Right? And there are people in my life who say, no, that's not an agreement that I'm willing to make. And so then I actually treat being on time pretty differently with them than I do in the rest of my life.
So what do you do with that person?
If they say no?
Yeah, if they say they really can't, but you really value something that they bring to the table, what do you do with that?
With that, I have some weighing to do, right? I'm not going to ask them to be on time anymore, right? That's one thing, is I'm not gonna get into a contract that I know is not gonna be honored.
Right.
So then I have to ask myself, if they work for me, for example, am I willing to continue to employ this person? I forget who it was who turned around, I think it was Ford, basically said, okay, folks, here are the expectations. And a number of people came forward and said, I'm not up for honoring those expectations. And he said, great, we can still be friends. I love you. It doesn't change. I have no judgment. And by the way, you can't work here. And that marries compassion with accountability, right? It is fine for you to have whatever view of timeliness you want to have. And I get to decide under what terms I'm willing to engage with that.
But let's say that person maybe is a vendor or somebody that has a value that you don't want to let go of, but you still need to figure out how to work with that person. What would you do at that point?
I would with myself challenge that assumption, right? Because those are always the vendor relationships that I end up regretting in the long run.
Okay.
And then if after challenging that assumption, I still go, okay, I have to work with them, then I have to figure out, okay, what are the terms under which this can work for me, right? So I might say, cool, no problem. I'm no longer going to be paying your invoices when I receive them. I'm going to be paying your invoices when I receive the goods. So if you're not willing to meet the deadline, that's fine. Got it. Turns out I don't have a timely need for them. I just more have a need to get them on a semi-regular basis. So this can work for me, provided that I'm paying your invoices upon receipt of goods or upon receipt of services instead of upon receipt of invoice. Right?
Okay.
So I ask myself always, what would it take to make this work? And then if they really aren't willing to meet what I require, then it's a bad relationship, and I need to reassess. Then I really need to challenge my assumption that it is a necessary relationship.
Okay.
It's an abusive relationship at that point.
All right. I'm good.
Cool. All right. So the last thing that I want to bring up, and I've got just 5 minutes to cover it, and that's fine, is the single most powerful tool any manager has. And it is often maligned, and it is often used improperly. And that is the one-on-one meeting weekly, 30 minutes, one-on-one, every supervisor with every single direct report. Now, the best way for you to do this poorly, to have it backfire, because it can backfire, is to not honor that yourself, right? If you don't show up, or if you are consistently canceling them, then that will surely backfire. Another great way to have it backfire is to turn it into a task-focused meeting, right? A working meeting. The purpose of a weekly one-on-one should be effectively, and when I say should, I mean it is effective when its primary purpose is establishing and maintaining a really healthy relationship. That it's all about having a great relationship with the people who work for you. Because when you have a great relationship, they're more likely to be transparent. They're more likely to meet their contractual obligations. And I'm going back using contract as in place of agreement. And they're more likely to renegotiate agreements when they need to, instead of simply missing deadlines, not being accountable. They're much more likely to be accountable. So weekly one-on-one meetings focused on building relationships. Do tasks come up and get discussed? Of course. It also gives an opportunity for healthy, consistent, pretty timely feedback. People tell me I don't have time for that. Then they do it and they say, I don't have time to not do this. It can be a significant part of your week, and the amount of time that it saves everybody who does it properly is tremendous. And my recommendation is that it begins with them. They speak first. After you say, hey, what's up? What's on your mind? We have a guide for how to do this, how to do it remotely as well. It's incredibly important, and all of it basically focuses on those few points that I just mentioned. So we've got, looks like on my clock, maybe 2.5 minutes or so. Any thoughts or questions about that? And I know that's, maybe the simplest thing that I've said all day. You must have weekly one-on-one meetings of 30 minutes with your direct reports. Yeah.
Can you email a link to the guide?
Yes. Raina, what's the best way to get email addresses for people?
I will email you her address.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts or questions about that? I cannot emphasize enough how much leverage as a leader you will have if you use this tool. If you've got too many direct reports, if you don't have time to do this, you might have to look at the structure of your company, the structure of your calendar. Do you have too many direct reports? The science shows that you can only be effective with 6 to 8 people, right? So that's 3 to 4 hours a week that you're spending this way. With the time that remains, I'll just say, and some of you have heard me say this before, it never gets less true. I know that your time and your attention are the most valuable assets that you have. They're the only non-replenishable resource. And so it's an honor to me that you've spent your time and attention with me today.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank
You
you.
bet. Hope it helps, and I'm always available to answer questions and chat and kind of massage through some of this stuff. Leadership is one of the hardest things that we ever have to do, and it's also one of the most rewarding.
Agreed. I appreciate it, Aaron. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. Thanks
Pleasure.
everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Karen.
You too.
Thanks again.
Bye all.
Adios.